Well, greetings, leaders, and welcome to Making the Mark. I'm your host, Mark McKern, and I'd like to welcome a very special guest today, Steve Dwyer, who's calling in from beautiful Mexico Beach, Florida. Welcome, Steve.
Good morning, Mark. Very catchy name of your show there. I love how you work your name into that. Pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Steve. A little bit about Steve. Steve is the Vice President and Leadership Consultant for Teamalytics, which is a global leadership and consulting firm. It works with medium and large size businesses and as well as sports teams. And today we're going to be discussing leadership behavior and the impact it has on team performance. So before we get started, today, Steve, how about a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. Enjoy any time I can spend with you, even if it's on a Zoom call. It's fun. As the audience doesn't know, but Mark, we go way back to our Army days. And probably the pivotal moment in our relationship was when I hit the winning shot in a basketball game that he was coaching on the other side. And I remember him screaming, "Would someone guard that guy?" And so that's where we really cemented our relationship, but we became even stronger friends as we went through the last part of our Army career and then into the corporate world. So my foray into the civilian world began as a chief learning officer for a company called Alltel, which is a cell phone company. It had wire line too for a while, but they offloaded that. And then I became a chief learning officer for another military contracting company called DynCorp. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I ran a little bit of a P&L in there somewhere, building helicopters for the Iraqi army. But I've spent most of my time in the world of leadership development and coaching.
All right, Steve. Can you tell us a little bit about Teamalytics and what you're doing with them now?
Yeah, so Teamalytics, originally I was a client. So I brought the company used to be called the Flipping Group, and I brought them into the company that I was the chief learning officer in, and as to help us develop a leadership development program. And so what they do is they use data, 360-degree data, behavioral data, and what they identify constraints, personal constraints and team constraints. And then they work to optimize reducing those constraints and optimize behavior. So that's kind of what we do. We work with teams. We do, cultural assessments and help them with culture. We help with hiring solutions where we try to bring the right person in so that they're a cultural fit or a behavioral fit for the company. And then most of the time I coach C-level suite executives and how they can overcome their constraints and become even better leaders.
Okay. Steve, we've had an interesting year to say the least, from the pandemic to the social unrest to businesses having to relook where they are and how they want to proceed in the future. And you've met with many of these leaders of these medium-sized companies from the C-suite on down with those leaders. And we've had a lot of discussions in the past about where leaders get stuck. And when they do get stuck, how do you unstuck them? To use a new word I just framed here. How do you get them out of the stuck mode, I would say, and the type of process. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with these leaders, particularly in light of what's happened in the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, the COVID is just another crisis, right? So leaders, that's what they do. They handle crisis, and our constraints are accentuated during a crisis. If we get put under pressure, the things that kind of bubble up are oftentimes the things that hold us back. We tend to go back to things that got us to where we are. For example, if we were really good at a frontline leadership level position because we had a strong grasp of the details, and we got moved up a couple layers, that strong grasp of details feels and looks like micromanagement. And so what we do in my practice is that I try to help people understand those constraints that may have worked at a lower level. And now they're starting to hold them back. So let's, superimpose COVID on this. I was in the middle of a client engagement in the first day of March. They had just closed on a company. So company A buys company B. Company A comes in, and on the first day of COVID, the day they announced that the Masters was going to be canceled, I was with the company in North Carolina with the buyer. And as we drove in together, we were staying in an apartment complex. So we drove in together. He looked at me and said, I may have just blown it by investing in this company, because they lost 70% of their revenue in 1 week. 70%. And so he immediately had to pivot. And his constraint is, I like a lot of control. I'm not that great of a nurturer. If you work for me, you kind of know that I like you, but I'm not going to tell you a lot. High, and the reflex to critique. Very fast pace, impatient. So those are all things that worked in his favor. Now, all of a sudden, you got 2,500 people that are thinking, I don't have a job. So he had to manage the caring piece that he wasn't that great at, with the, accountability, pushing fast. And so we kind of came up with a little plan that said, hey, look, if you're going to keep these people, you're going to have to show that you care. So we had these town hall meetings where it was before you had to be 6 feet apart. And as we try to knock those town hall meetings, North Carolina kept coming in with more restrictions. Pretty soon it was 50 people in a room. So we'd have 50 at a time saying, here, this is what we're going to do. So he put all the things that he knew he wasn't good at into those town hall meetings. They ended up loving.
Yeah.
And so he gained the culture of the company even during the crisis of COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you talk about constraints, clearly you have to understand what your constraints are to take the actions to overcome them.
Yeah.
How do you help business leaders? Or I know you have tools there, but what if you don't have the tools? How do you get that kind of awareness to understand what your constraints are?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So there's 3 things that really, really good leaders and sometimes even great leaders know about. One is they're self-aware. Mm-hmm. They really do know what the impact that their behavior has on others. I mean, really, behavior is just how people feel around you. So I'm right now moving my hands, I'm kind of animated. That's a behavior. And it's making you feel something, which then influences you to go do something. So we have to be aware of that. Now, we have a proprietary 360-degree profile thing that takes 11 minutes to do, and boom, it points out your constraints right away. The next thing you got to do is you got to have a plan to address them. And if you have a plan to address them, is it intentional? Do you know that, hey, occasionally when I get a lot of pressure puts on me, my impatience comes out, and I got to be more present with the person in the room. And then the last piece is you have to be able to be incredibly grateful for feedback. You have to be easy to coach from every level, top, middle, and your direct reports. And the leaders that can do those 3 things are just much more effective in my experience with leaders. So it's self-awareness, have a plan to address constraints, and be incredibly easy to coach.
Mm-hmm. Now, which of those 3 areas do leaders struggle with the most?
The third one. Mm-hmm. All right, here's your data. All right, yeah, they kind of look at it and go, yeah, that's me. Sometimes they don't want anybody else to see it, but really it's other people have told them, hey, this is what it feels like to be around you. The plan, we can develop a plan in minutes. What do I do to overcome these constraints? The problem is humans are terrible at giving feedback in the moment the right way and receiving feedback. We're awful at it. Mm-hmm. And so what I do is I teach them how to give it so that people can hear it, and to receive it so you appear to be grateful. Because if you're grateful, you might get it again. So that's the piece that especially leaders, at the CEO, COO, CFO level, what they struggle with is getting someone who may not be as competent as them that says, hey, boss, this is what it feels like to be around you.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. And for them to say that, and then the boss to not, fire them or hold it against them is rare. But in companies that the culture, it's okay to do that, they're high performing companies.
Yeah. Yeah. So without a Teamalytics analysis, you talked about the 360 you do, and it is an amazing feedback tool. Having done it myself, in fact. What types of tools would you suggest that business leaders use to get that kind of feedback, or to get that to work on that skill set of asking and receiving feedback in a positive way that helps them recognize these constraints or understand what people are thinking and feeling?
Well, you have to build relational capacity to have that kind of a conversation. So where have you made the investment in the relationship? When I was coaching you, we had a pretty strong relationship. You trusted me. So we have to build some relational capacity with each other, or we can't have that conversation. I can't just walk up to you on a plane and go, you got kind of a grumpy face. Maybe if you just softened it a little bit, people would follow you better. I can't do that anymore. Although you've really you've softened that grumpy face. But imagine if I had walked up to you and said that, right? So let's create some relational capacity so that we can have conversations. Now, leaders that can create great conversations, that changes lives. Reading a book or watching a podcast, it's interesting. But what changes lives are great conversations. So I say the way we do that is, if I'm having a conversation with you and you truly know that I care about you, that's going to be a different conversation than me just pulling you in going, hey, you're not doing a good job, and here's where you didn't do a good job. So I actually have 6 questions that I can go into, if you'd like, that create that kind of a conversation.
No, I definitely like you to expand on those. And you brought up a key point. Leaders want to know that you care. I mean, too many leaders, it feels like they just want to let people know how much they know, and the people really just want to care that they know that they care about it.
Yeah. Well, in COVID, we have a couple things. So about 70% of me showing you that I care, our nurturing behavior, the way we connect emotionally, about 70% comes from body language and facial expression. About 20% comes from tone of voice.
Right.
So think of what we've done with COVID. Let's say you're a low nurturer. Now I put, a screen between me and you, so I can't feel that nurturing. But if we're in person, there's now a mask, and all I can see are your eyes. And so, COVID has really, kind of put a lot of barriers up. So you have to almost now overcare, be over-intentional about how we build relationships, instead of just saying, well, he knows that I care about, or he knows that he's doing a great job. And that's the part I think a lot of leaders forget, is what are the barriers for me to give you, that affirmation? Well, now I'm wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And so just imagine trying to hear that. Hey, Mark, you're doing a great job. So we have to, overcome that, be more intentional about that.
Yeah. Well, so let's discuss, as you mentioned, the 6 powerful questions that you use in those discussions with leaders.
Yeah. Right. So if I'm having a conversation, even when I start out the conversation, I have there's 6 questions that I ask, and it seems simple, but it just helps people remember them. So I kind of put them in a little bit of a model. But the first thing I want to know is, what is their goal? What do they want to do? And by the way, as a coach, if I'm doing this as a coach, then I've done this a lot, right? So I've got sort of a plan. But if I'm the leader, you might not have these conversations a lot. So the key to the conversation, the first time you ask these 6 questions, is to affirm, to be present, to really listen, to even write down the answers, because you've got to convince that person that this part of the conversation, them to you, really matters. So we're going to ask 6 questions, and then I'm going to answer the 5 of them at the end as the leader to give them my feedback. But the 6 questions are, what's your goal? So whatever that goal is, you kind of want to lean into it. Is that a goal on the project? Is it the project to be done on time? Is it a career goal? Is it a goal to be a better father, husband, mother, brother? What's the goal? What do you really want? Sometimes the goal is just to be heard.
Right.
I'm working with a chief engineer. What's your goal? I just want people to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I got that. That's a good goal. Where are you on the journey to get to that goal? Where are you? Well, I'm not quite there yet. I want to be a vice president. I'm 2 years out. Whatever that is, let's figure out where they think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask them, where should you be? At this point in your career, you're 2 years away from being a vice president. Where should you be? Well, I should be almost a vice president. Okay, what got in your way? Do you know what got in your way? Is it, if they focus on an external reason, I say, okay, we can't do anything about that. Politics or, whatever the reason that they come up with that's not on them. What can you do? What are your constraints to getting where you want to get? And so that's where we kind of, the 360 is definitely helpful there, because there are 13 scales that we measure. We can hone in as the coach. I can hone in on what those are.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do about it? So we figured out that my constraint is that I really don't connect well with people. I'm kind of an introvert. I overthink things. I wring my hands a lot. I don't have a good connection with people. Okay, what are we going to do about it? So we come up with steps. We call them traction steps, but they're steps that they take to overcome those constraints. And then what is that going to look like? That's the 6th question. What will that look like? How will I know you're doing that? And then after we get all that, right, I'm just listening. I'm not judging. I'm just listening. Then I say, okay, I'm going to answer the questions now. Here's where I think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where I think you should be. Here's what I think gets in the way. Here's what I think you should do about it. Here's what that would look like from my perspective. And so that conversation usually takes about 45 minutes to an hour and a half. That's the conversation where they walk away going, I think I know what I have to do. I definitely know what my boss thinks, or in my case, my coach thinks. And so I've got a decision to make. Do I want to, go down the path where I have a plan? I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what it's supposed to look like. Or do I just say, nah, it's too hard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go for that goal.
Yeah.
But those kind of conversations are what changes lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and what you described in the second part of that is you reading back what you heard from them, and your validation, and saying it in their words, using their language in that communication. I imagine is pretty powerful for them to hear it that way in a readback mode.
Yeah, and you're proving to them that you're listening.
Yeah.
And you're not just immediately going, well, here's what I think you should do. So if you want to be a vice president, you've got to be more critical with people. You have to hold them more accountable. And you're not doing that right now. Here's 3 examples. And we're having this conversation because I want you to get to your goal. My goal is your success.
Right.
So in order for you to get to where you want to go, here's what you got to do.
Yeah. You said something really key as a leader. My goal is your success. Just to say those words to a leader, or a leader to say those words to someone, a subordinate or someone working for them, pretty powerful.
If you have relational capacity. If all you've done your whole time being the boss of this person is criticize them, they won't believe you. So you have to reset or reframe your relationship with them. And I teach a lot of leaders to do is say, hold your data up, show it to them. Hey, look, this is what I've been struggling with. Here's where I screwed up our relationship. Look, I'm too high on criticality. I critique you all the time, and I shouldn't. Look how low I am on nurturing. So will you accept my apology for this behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Can we reset our relationship? Because my goal, my heart, which you can't see because I don't express it, is for you to get better.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Can we start over again?
Yeah, well, you hit on vulnerability right there. The leader showing that vulnerability, which is going to lead to better trust,
Right.
and then create that relationship you just described. You know, I love the 6 points. It's feels like a discussion I could have with one of my kids, or my spouse, or my wife, or my friends, or my coworkers.
Yeah. Well, this model was invented because a child left their bike in the driveway, and the father came home and said, "Where's your bike?
Yeah,
Where should it be? What got in the way of getting it in there?
yeah,
What are you going to do about it? And what will that look like?" And then the last question they asked in this scenario was, "What's going to happen? What are we going to do if it happens again?" So there's some consequence to it.
yeah,
Now, if it's a rehabilitative conversation with the direct report, there may be some accountability in there. Hey, if you keep doing this, what's going to happen? And
yeah.
one of the things I say is, you're behaving your way off of our team.
Hmm.
You know, this constraint is now getting to the point where you may not be on our team. I hate to see that, but your choice of the behavior is keeping you from being a fully functional member of our team, and I won't allow that. So you're going to have to change that behavior, which is your choice to do.
Yeah. Which one of the four was it?
My kids,
Yeah,
the oldest,
yeah. That was an easy call.
Steve. Yeah,
Thank you for that, Steve, for that leadership development.
yeah. But it works. It works for kids, and it works for it creates a conversation that changes behavior, which then changes their life.
Yeah, simple but not simplistic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so Steve, as we wrap up today, as you think about what faces our business leaders moving through 2020 into 2021, and uncertainty, you name it, everything that's happening, plus an election and everything else. What key takeaways would you leave for our business leader listeners as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think leaders need to understand that every single day they become dinner conversation, and people are impacted by their behavior. And so they might just say, well, that's just the way I am. Too bad. I need to hire better people, whatever that is. They still need to realize that the behavior that they display by choice has an impact on people. So it has an impact on the people that directly come in contact with them, but it also has an impact on the families that they go home to.
Yeah.
And then it has an impact generationally sometimes. When I think about my best leader that I ever worked for, he not only impacted me for years to come, but he impacted my kids and probably the way they treat their kids, because my leadership behavior is sort of an amalgamation of his and a couple other people. And so he had a great effect, I think, on me. And then that hopefully will have a great effect on others. And so I think we have to be very thoughtful and intentional about the impact we have. As you walk down the street and you don't say hi to somebody, the impact that has on the person that you walk past. If you walk past a direct report and don't say hi because you're too busy, they go home and say, the boss is mad at me.
Yeah.
Or if you just give a, hey, how you doing? So you have to be hypersensitive of the communication that you give. So what is your impact and your behavior? Leadership is behavior that influences an outcome. So you get to control that. That's the great thing about this. We get to control our behavior. We may not be able to control the influence it has, but we do control behavior. And so I would say I like to lead the leaders with, let's be more intentional about what are our constraints and what can we do about them so that our behavior impacts positively on the outcomes of our business.
That's some powerful stuff, Steve, especially that the analogy with discussion at the dinner table. So as always, phenomenal pearls of wisdoms from a great friend and mentor who does have some revisionist memory of our basketball careers along the way. I just want to let the listeners know that. But we won't debate that today. Steve, great to have you on. It looks like a fantastic day down there at Mexico Beach, which, is a community that's done a phenomenal job bouncing back from Hurricane Michael, the eye of that hurricane 2 years ago, October. And always great to see you. I look forward to catching up with you in the future. And thanks for those, your counsel today and words of advice.
My pleasure.
All right, listeners, again, thanks for being here today with Making the Mark. And we look forward to our next podcast. And I can guarantee we'll see Steve again. Be well and stay healthy.